Probably me. Hey.
Hey.
Hello, Zachary.
Hey, Zachary and I, we were just talking about how much Brian loves to be called Bri.
It's not true.
So,
You're listening or watching this. It's not true.
I mean,
I value names. Ask Zachary. I asked
This is true.
2 weeks ago. I was like, hey, what do you call yourself? I need to know. It says Zachary down there, but I keep saying Zach. I don't feel good about this.
what was the answer?
Well, he said
Well,
Okay.
for 43 years of my life, it was Zach, and at 44, I just was like, hey, let's just start using my full name. It sounds a little bit more intelligent, I thought, right? And I need help.
Was it kind of a midlife crisis type of thing? Just like a mild version?
I don't know. To be honest with you, my mom went from being Kathy to Kate and Catherine when she was about my age. I just realized that the other day. So I was like, oh my gosh, I'm more like my mom than I thought.
Wow.
Well, this is Coco back over here. What else do we call you?
I've been called many things. Coco has a rich history.
That was like one of the first podcasts we did that Joe Reed called you Coco.
That's true, man. Good times.
Coco and Bri.
Well, I'm excited.
To be honest, I don't know that I could call another man Bri. Coco, I'm sorry, but
wait a second. Yeah, no problem. But Bri else. All right, that's fine. Whatever.
No, it's all good. I have 8-week relationship already with Brian, so it's hard to go against Brian. If it would have been just today, maybe I could have But
well, I do appreciate that you emphasize both syllables of my name, because where I'm from, it's usually just one. Brian.
Brian.
Man, I feel like you teed us up a little bit for like you guys have an 8-week friendship, right? And it's like, I want to know more about Zachary, like your history of the last 8 weeks, but even more in the last 40 years. See how I did that?
Who are you?
Yeah.
Who am I?
Yeah. Who are you, Zachary?
Deep introspection.
Well, knowing that we have some time constraints, I'm going to try to be brief. I am Zachary Harrod, and I'm originally from just north of Chicago, and
cool.
I've lived here in Prague, Czech Republic for about 20 years. My first touch point with the Czech Republic was in 2002. So over the last 22 years, it's 20 years I've been here. And I went to the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, and that is where I became a Christ follower. I joked with our huddle that we did with the missionary pathway. I'm getting ahead of ourselves, but I joked around that I was that stereotypical Campus Crusade kid. I was the guy who got a yellow booklet that says the 4 laws on it. On a dinner line survey. And I'll be honest, I just wanted to talk to the cute girl that was doing the dinner line surveys.
That's how Cory and
Brian. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Sorry. You wanted to cute girl. Keep going.
Yeah. So my life while I was at school was just turned upside down, and got involved with Campus Crusade. Probably started leading way, way, way too soon. And I went on a summer project with Athletes in Action that ended up leading me to the Czech Republic the following summer. And there's a quote from Franz Kafka that says, Prague is like a little mother. Once she gets her claws in you, she doesn't let you go. And that was definitely true. And most people assume it's had to be because of a woman. No, I was here 10 years before I met my wife. So it was purely just God pricking my heart with this city and the opportunity. I originally came over with Athletes in Action, so I was playing American football and helping coach American football, and that just led into a lot of other avenues throughout life. I ended up becoming the head coach of our youth programs. Then we won the national championship a few times. And then we went through an ugly team split, and I stayed with the team and became the offensive coordinator and pretty much running things with a few guys. And in that whole time, also got involved with a Czech church plant, and started doing a missional community. After I got in touch with guys, I went to a conference in the east of the country with Jeff Vanderstilt and Caesar and Mike Gunn when those guys were all doing Soma. And just was something different than I had heard. The thought of discipleship starting the moment I meet somebody, and not once I have a believer, which in the Czech Republic, for those of the listeners that don't know, it boasts about being, the country boasts about being probably the largest or most atheistic country in the world. There's been a bunch of different stats on it. My wife and I, who's Czech, we use the statistic that is a little older, but we feel like it's the most realistic on the ground, of like roughly 90% of people say, I'm Czech, I'm an atheist. And the evangelical church is less than 1/3 of 1%. So the thought of doing discipleship in the traditional sense, I felt like I was behind the 8 ball all the time. Like, I'm never going to disciple anybody here. And so I connected with those guys, and within the church plant that I joined, we started a missional community and started getting some traction before burnout. Not my personal burnout, but people that were involved with our church. And it happened with 2 of our leaders, and then COVID hit, and all that was left was pretty much that missional community. And we kind of let the ground go fallow, and are getting ready to start relaunching things. And that's why Brian and I got in touch, and I went through the missionary pathway huddle. And in the midst of all that too, I was coaching football. I ended up becoming the coach of the adult team as well, and we won a couple championships as well. And then a new league started here a few years back called ELF, and a professional, trying to move to full professional over here. And I thought there's no way we could ever get into it, and ended up finding an investor. They brought us in, and to say it really, the really, really short version is everything went south really fast. Last year, I ended up working 100-hour weeks. My wife had work pushed on her behind my back and was working 50-hour weeks. Anxiety levels for her and my son were through the roof, and I got to an impossible position that I thought I would never get to, where I was like, okay, what is my dream, and what has God called me to? I love the game of American football, but I love my family and my wife and my own health. I had health issues with that last year. That was definitely the priority. And so stepped down and took a 6-month sabbatical, and been praying through and working through just next steps, realizing that God has, right away, we knew that God, through all that, was saying, stay in Prague. And my team leader with Converge is the missions organization I work with now. Several times since then has been like, Zach, any other person would be like, forget that place. I went through that betrayal. I went through this. This was said of me. This was done, et cetera, et cetera. I'm done. But to quote now somewhat infamous pastor, but he always said he loved his city like you love a drunk uncle. And I kind of love this place that way. You know, like, there's just days where it is so sweet to me. It's amazing. I love life here. And then there's those days where it's like, what the heck am I doing here? I've invested so much time, and where are we? Why is this? But God always keeps pulling me back here. So that's me in a nutshell, and not politically charged description of what I've been through.
Well done.
Well, you're a championship coach. Dude. So we're in this little series, we're talking about coaching ongoing disciple makers. We're spending some extended time around coaching, and so Cory's coming in a little late to the conversation, but we were talking about we should get more coaches on this little section of this podcast where we're exploring 248's document about the observations in urban disciple making movements. You're in an urban context. You're literally a coach in another aspect, but you're also this disciple maker. So we did get to go through the missionary pathway. Shout out to the missionary pathway.
Yes.
So we're just going to ask a few questions that ChatGPT came up with.
Hey. I came up with half of those. Okay. I can't remember which ones at this moment, but I came up with half of them, and it took my good ideas and made them better, I guess.
Yeah, well, we'll ask the good half.
Yeah, yeah.
Whatever we'll ask the good half.
Well, those are mine then.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We're going to go, the next half hour or so, just kind of meandering our way toward that ongoing coaching question.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, let's, we'll highlight the missionary pathway here a little bit. We're starting to I feel like last year we didn't take it off, but we sort of slowed down, focused on some things. And this year we've had like an increase in how many of these we're doing, who's coaching them where. Mm-hmm. So Zachary, you got connected, you're in the missionary pathway. Like, what were the revelations? What did it do for you?
I think because I have a lot of these things in my head, right, that we talked about. I mean, and I've been connected with guys that are doing missional communities and now doing micro churches, depending on what term you want to use. And I think what it sort of did was gave me tracks to run on. It helped me narrow down all these ideas that were just kind of floating, like I had all these things like, oh, but there's this and there's that, and this means this, and it gave me tracks to run on, which since I've been through it and I've been trying to relay that to my wife, and she tries to watch the videos back after we did it, we're just saying, okay, this is not rocket science. It's super simple, but it's not easy. So, and you have to be extremely deliberate. So it's really just given us so many ways to communicate it in a way that we know what we're talking about now. And we're not trying to explain it extra. Like, okay, well, we need to do this because of this and because of this. Now it's like, no, we know why we're having these conversations with our friends, why we take time to work through our stories and come up with 15-second stories where we could see where somebody's at with spiritual things, which I know the answer probably going into that conversation with most checks here, but I could see based on some of these things we've learned and worked through, like, okay, are they giving me just a red light? Or in the Czech Republic, we don't have yellow lights. They call them orange. Or are they giving me an orange light?
Way to contextualize that. That's good stuff right there.
Well, I said that to my wife in Czech one day. I'm like, to byla žluta? Was it yellow? And she looked at me like, huh? And I'm like, oh, was it orange? And she's like, oh, yeah. And I'm like,
that's funny, man.
Yeah, there's that's a whole, that I didn't include any commerce or Czech language questions in there because that could take us down a dangerous path.
It's funny, man. Like missionary pathways, it's just really like a lot of our language that we've learned, from global movements. So, and a lot of it's contextualized to Western, like American things. And so then even taken again, it's like there's a translation of a translation, but in the end, a lot of it, it's simple. It's just very biblical, simple ways to begin to walk this out, find people who God's at work on, and then and begin to, what you said, really begin that discipleship process right there. Right. And the very questions were, and so is there, like, I know we could probably go down this a long way, and maybe we'll just, if there's a fast version here so we can get some of the is like, what were some of the major ways of contextualizing this, or like the Czech version of the things that jump out to you in the missionary pathway?
Yeah, we've been working through this a lot, and we're still in process. And I've talked to my team leader, Steve Valentine, who spent a bunch of years in Poland too. And we had been talking about discovery Bible studies beforehand, and different strategies, if you want to use that word or whatnot. And every week I'd be in the huddle, the pathway, and I would sit there after we talked, and I would just stare at the content and be like, God, how the heck am I going to translate some of this stuff? Not words, but like the practice here, because like even the Discovery Bible Study, like I love it. Like it's simple and beautiful, and requires me shutting up and asking more questions, which I definitely need in my life and my apprenticeship process with Jesus in general. But then I'm like, but the way they do it in KC, because it being still not as post-Christian is here, is a lot different. Like I can't be like, this guy is giving me orange lights. So I could like, you know, can I ask him to read the Bible with me? And it's like, because the minute I say, hey man, you want to read the Bible with me? That orange light is becoming red real fast. So I think some of the ways that like I'm kind of having to step back, my wife and I are stepping back, and we're kind of looking at, and I wouldn't say it's linear, right? You guys have talked about that in other podcasts. This isn't a linear process of, but I kind of have had to step back with her, and we say, okay, let's look at it as a linear path. Yeah. Just to help us try to contextualize it. And if this is their A and this is their B, what do we have between there? We have to find those middle grounds. And so I think in our context, a lot of times those middle grounds just mean more time, being right where that person is at, and having those 15-second stories ready, and actually just sharing life. Like, to be honest with you guys, we went through hell last year, and if somebody wanted to read about it, they could just Google my name, because the tabloids picked up the story here at one point. And so some of the people that have met me, I know they definitely, I could tell based on the conversation, had Googled me after we had already had a touch point. And it's, I think the way that I've contextualized this stuff the best and found those middle grounds in between point A, point B per se, is just brutal honesty, is just living out the hurt and the pain that we went through, what we've walked through with our therapist and with becoming emotionally healthy, what we're learning in general, and watch people respond to that. Like, I was having a conversation recently with somebody like, Zach, I can't believe I didn't know anything besides what I could read online, what you went through. And then when you told me a bit about it, when I asked questions, I just think you're like a superhero. Like, you could just withstand large levels of just the crap hitting the fan. And I'm like, wow. And I said, you know what? God might have made me a little bit different so I could withstand more than the average person. But at the end of the day, like, if I wasn't made different, if he didn't do that in me, there's no way I could have done it. And if he hadn't provided a way in the midst of that trial, there's no way I could have. And then I could gauge it, you know, and then I think that's actually seen a few conversations go a lot further than they would have if I was just in that normal status quo that life was up until last year. So I think that's the biggest way we can contextualize it. And that's not even a thing for here per se. That's just being okay in our skin and what God's doing, to realize that this is my story. For some reason, it's what I have. There's a wealth of theological spectrum we could talk. Did God allow it? Did God ordain it? Who knows? But this is my story. And God can move in the midst of it, and just being willing to be vulnerable. And I think vulnerability, no matter how post-Christian or post-whatever the society is, vulnerability always provides a pathway to something deeper in the heart.
Yeah, man. It's
good, man.
Yeah, it makes me, I'm like, we're always trying to think through, how do we, like, not improve, but what are the components that maybe we're missing with the missionary path? I mean, it's like, I don't want to do a whole nother week on vulnerability, because you can't capture that in a moment and like train people. It has to be like you got to live into it and take some risks, and you're going to get hurt, you know, as soon as you open up and people hear stories or whatever. It's like, oh, they didn't receive that. You know? But that really is a component of that. I like the language of just being comfortable in your skin and being willing to go, this is the way I feel right now. Just beginning to sit And
Actually, even this morning, with my wife out of town right now, I took my youngest to preschool, and I was sitting at the cafe that we just show up at daily now, which is one of the beautiful things in life. I could say now is my wife and I almost every day start with a coffee at our local coffee shop, and we're just developing relationships there. And it's been so good for what we're talking about, but it's also been amazing for our marriage. And today I was sitting there reading a book, and I thought I had it in reach, Sifted, by I can't tell you who off the top of my head, but it's a really great book, referencing when I have it in check in my head. Shimon Peter, when Jesus said that Satan has asked to sift you, and the whole book is talking about what do you do in these sifting seasons. So I'm sitting there reading this book, and the man who owns the business next door, who I say every morning I see him, I say, "Dobry den, good day," and I just polite with him, and I've offered him help before to unload his car. I think he saw it as an opportunity because I wasn't sitting with my wife today, and we actually talked, and he asked me about the book, and I just said, "Yeah." I forget the exact route that I went down, but I said, "Yeah, the last year's been really rough, and I'm just really working through a lot of different things and asking God where we're at." And he asked another question, and I'm like, "Wait, this dude's doing my job for me." And and there I sat as I started asking him questions. The more questions I asked, the more questions he would ask. It was like we were in this question, like who's going to ask more question, and like, and it was this beautiful moment of, I don't think he had talked with many people and that have really gone there that quick to being vulnerable, and me being that vulnerable with him almost immediately just be like, "Man, yeah, last year was rough. I didn't know if we were going to stay here or go or anything." He just was like right away wanting to know more. But it's one of those things, like, you gotta be okay. Like I said, right? It's like, this is a story that God has written, has allowed, and he could do amazing things with it.
As a tiny little pause to that, or just a quick story. There's a couple connected here in KC, living in an apartment complex that I know that recently started a discovery, Bible study environment with, I think 3 or 4 people have been coming across the religious background spectrum, but none of them really following Jesus at all. And they tell this story of like the vulnerability that this crew has. They kind of knew each other a little bit, but they've been creating relationships. The vulnerability of those 5 to 6 people in that room is more than he's ever experienced in any church setting in his life. And it was crazy because these people aren't professing to follow Jesus yet. They're beginning this discovery process, but you can tell there's something about vulnerable community that I don't know, man. It takes defenses down. But my friend here was telling me about it. Like, this is family. They've become family in 3 weeks of meeting together. Yeah. Wow. It's just like, beginning with that sort of vulnerability. And so that it does sound like that probably, maybe even to a more degree, in the check, but just that question asking is a sense of our own vulnerability, too. Like, we want to be, but people ask us questions back. We can talk about this. We can engage in real conversation, which I think is really your point of what's happening here too. So yeah, man, it's good stuff.
Well, let's one more question related to the missionary pathway, because I want to get into some ongoing coaching principles, how you see that, mainly because this part of the series we're in. Yeah. But in one of our missionary pathway huddle weeks, you were sharing like the 15-second story, which you brought up already. If you can bring up the one that your wife was sharing without getting too specific, because we don't like to tell too specific stories. Do you remember that one?
Gosh,
you were saying that I forget who she was talking to now. Maybe I shouldn't have teed up this story since we're both blanking on it.
AI did not come up with this question.
I remember what I told you guys. I'm trying to remember what I had said about her, because her and I have talked a lot about this recently. What were you saying? Just see if it jogs my memory.
Well, you can tell yours then. I think you were saying that she had come up with one and had already used it with someone in your context, where she's like, I just used this morning with somebody, or
what was it? I mean, I could tell you quick about mine, and if that jogs my memory, because I was like looking. I think I even have that in arm's reach. What I said. What did she say? I had shared that I had met somebody weeks.
Give context around what the 15-second story was and why that was important.
Yes. So one of the best things, guys, I'll be honest with you about this is going to totally sound like a cheesy like commercial. One of the best things about the missionary pathway, hold on, is it's just there's so many PDFs. Like my wife, every time I download something, it pings on her Dropbox, and she's like, "What are you downloading?" Like, and I'm like, more stuff about the gospel. And she's like, she's like, oh my gosh. I think sometimes she wishes I could go back to what it was, because like I wouldn't be reading all these things and getting all these ideas and whatnot, and be like, hey, you need to read this. Hey, I saw this. You need to check this out. But the 15-second story, is a document from the Gospel Conversation Tools. And pretty much the gist of it is to have a 15-second story where you could gauge where somebody's at and see, hey, this is going to be a point where we could have a deeper conversation. This is going to be a point where we could ask another question, whatnot. But it really talks about, I like to think about it like when being a Campus Crusade baby, right? Like your 3-minute testimony, before Christ, during Christ, and then after. But like shrink that down into like 15 seconds and like almost an antidote. And to gauge somebody, that's what at least I would say. If Brian, you want to correct me.
No, that was great, man.
Yeah.
So I met somebody months ago, and recently we were talking, and I just said, yeah, there's just 2 things I know for sure in my life. And they're like, really? What? I'm like, I said, yeah, 2 things like I've really heard from God, like heard from God, not audible voice, but just know, like, and it was that God wants me in the Czech Republic. And he said that again and again when I wanted to leave. And he also wanted me to marry Misha. And it was just this super short, probably not even 15 seconds when I even said it. And the guy was like, what's that look like? And it was like, and it was an opportunity to have a conversation and move deeper. And unfortunately, what my wife said, it was really good, obviously, because it registered with you, but I am blanking on it, Brian.
That's all right.
No, that's actually a really good example of like these little sometimes we call them kingdom statements, these little nuggets where we're just like, it's the truth about what God is doing in our own life or something he's teaching us. And you put it out there. And if people lean into it, sweet.
Yeah.
If people don't, then you're just having a conversation with people. You're just loving people. But I like to think of it, like Seth has talked about it in this way. You put a little gospel rock and pebble in someone's shoe and you make him walk around with it a little bit, so that statement, it's this little thing, but man, they walk away. Yeah. And that's like that. What does he freaking mean by like God tells him? Like that's something that that conversation can always happen again.
Yeah.
And we get so ingrained with like sharing the gospel is this one-time thing that we proclaim these truths, they respond in this way, and then bada bing, bada boom. But there is, that's a phrase I don't think I've ever said before.
Honestly, I was just thinking, I was like, I've never heard Cory say that.
Yeah, it's I don't know.
You tried.
Bada bing, bada boom. Hey.
See? Yeah. What is that? How do you translate that?
You don't translate that.
You don't say that ever in English, please. But yeah, just that idea that sharing the gospel doesn't have to be just that. We're sharing stories and ideas and realities of what it means to be children of God, and that for the kingdom of God to break through. And those conversations don't have to just happen once. You can come back to them over and over again. That's why you're building relationships with the people at the cafe or the coffee shop next to you, right? Like it's not just a one-time thing. So anyway, I just love that. Thanks for sharing all that. We haven't touched on that in a minute.
Yeah,
that's good stuff. I mean, seriously, like I haven't talked with Brian about this, but like we're gonna like I need to translate all this stuff as we're passing it on to other checks, you know. So it's like even just actually translating it. And one of the ways that I've this just gave me more. Like I had been, for years I've been saying, yeah, that like we just need to give them gospel snacks. Like we just want to rush them to the table and like say like eat this steak, you know. And it's like, well, maybe they're not hungry for that steak, you know. And even I said this in the huddle that night. I said, yeah, I said gospel snacks at one point, and somebody that got super like theologically like in his underwear in a bind was like, but the gospel isn't a snack, Zachary. And I'm like, I'm not.
Yeah, just give it the heavy sigh.
You know, and it's just like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, you know, this person isn't ready for the steak, but they might be ready, you know, for, you know, a little salty snack, and they might want some more, or they might spit it out. And I'll be like, okay, that's not the way to go with that person.
Or like a little like strawberry dip or something like that.
All right.
Carrot and ranch.
10 minutes on these next couple of questions here. So, yeah, how do you see the role of ongoing coaching in disciple-making movements, particularly in a post-Christian context like Prague?
Or like a little smoky.
You like that?
Like a little smoky with like bacon around it. You guys know what I'm talking about.
Bring it back, Cory.
Sorry. Ask that question again.
Ongoing coaching and disciple-making. This had to be a Zachary question. There's no way AI came up with this.
No, that was mine. That was actually the first one I prompted it to. And these other ones came from that, if I remember correctly.
Nice.
Well, like when I was coaching, if I related to just being a sports coach of any kind, like any good coach is not going to just be like, okay, hey, I learned this and I'm just going to do this. And I'm not going to, like, if he's a good coach, he's going to constantly be trying to see what's going on, look at things too. Since you guys are in Kansas City, I'll give you a little love. You know, Andy Reid, like that man is brilliant because he's a learner.
Yeah.
Like I kid you not, he watches high school film and is seeing what is going on at the high school level. And this, like, I would imagine Tony Romo's already said this or something on a Sunday broadcast, but like a good coach is always looking for ways to be coached and add to his coaching. So that's just like, as I coached over the years, I was constantly looking for more and trying to do things. And I think my wife is going crazy now because now the coaching I'm receiving pertains to her. So I'm constantly talking to her about what I'm learning. Whereas before, if it was a boot pass or a different concept where you're reading high-low, a triangle concept, blah, 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 she'd be like, whatever. I knew she wouldn't care. So we never talked about it. So now she's probably a little overwhelmed with me constantly. But I think whatever environment you're in, here or there, just that ongoing role of, we can't just be okay with the status quo, what we learned yesterday, because people are constantly evolving. We're constantly evolving. Things are constantly changing. We need to be constantly changing, and looking for other ways to communicate. Not that the gospel changes or anything like that, as we know, but the way people communicate and what's going on is constantly changing. So I think, and I was talking with a friend recently, and I just said, you know, like, I don't think there's anybody actually, there's lots of people coaching how to do good sermons. Not lots of people. When you're in a country where it's less than 1/3%, there's not a lot of people, but there are people doing those things, and those are good things. You're like, hey, they're not bad things. They're good things. Like, how are we doing Sunday gatherings? How are we preaching? Those type of traditional things. And I haven't met anybody here that is really coaching people in the ongoing role of, this is what it looks like to see apprentices of Jesus. And I use apprentice more over the last few months. I've started switching to apprentice. But like, what does that discipleship or apprentice role look like, and how do we continue? So I think it's, wherever you're at, it's just constantly working on that and constantly saying, we want to get better and we want to develop here. And so I think it, again, like, this isn't something that's about the Czech Republic. I think it's something in general for wherever we're at as far as coaching.
Nope. What? Yep. both leaning in. Nope.
So are there any, like, as you've got this experience with missional communities, and you're shifting You're thinking about what's Jesus calling us to next. When you think about missionary pathway, you think about your experience with missional communities, you're thinking maybe some micro church stuff now. Like, what do you see as, like, I don't know, like sort of the way God's formed you as a coach that you bring to the table, that others can consider and like, yeah, this is like, these are tools, these are ways to think as a coach, that shape you, that can help shape others in that.
Wow, that's a good one. I think
that AI. Let's go.
that's real intelligence.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I look at just how I've coached football and now how I'm transitioning into this role. I think one of the biggest things is I was always one of those coaches that was not and is not afraid to get his hands dirty or step into things, right? Like I was teaching football to Czech kids who had never caught a football for years or ever. Like they never caught a football, right?
Right.
So like I always think back to like when I was doing these school presentations and I'd like start breaking things down for these kids to learn how to throw and catch an American football, a very foreign thing here. And I would break things down to the minuscule little parts, you know? So like, this is what you do with your elbow and this is why, you know? So, and I let them know, like, you want to do this and this is the reason. You want to do this with your thumb and this is the reason, because it will get you this outcome. And I think and now in this role, and this is probably some of the most questions I asked Brian during the missionary pathways was, I was trying to constantly figure out, okay, you're saying this, but why are you saying this? Like, what does this mean? And a lot of times he would say that to us, but a lot of times he wanted us to just discuss it, and he was facilitating and not being the one that was teaching. And I just wanted to be taught and not discovered on my own, which is a good principle in itself for a coach. But being able to break those things down, even like we were talking about, like the gospel story, breaking it down to the snacks, right? Or those small pieces where they could understand it, constantly looking for ways. Okay, this is why we do this, and this could lead us to this, and this is where do you, and then asking them, okay, how do you see that playing out? And then, okay, you try it, because he always got to the point when I was coaching sport, and now where I'm coaching something that's very different than a sport. Like I was meeting with my therapist this week, and he's like, one of my former players said, do you think you'll ever coach again? I said, probably not, unless God changes something in drastic ways, like just drastic, big, like ways. There's just no way I'm probably going to coach other than my son, you know, in the yard. And my therapist said to me, he's like, oh, Zach, you're already coaching. You can't get away from coaching, Zach. And it's one of those things, like thinking a step or two ahead would be another thing I would say. Right. Which helps you for asking questions. One of the things I loved about being an offensive coordinator is I like to think about, okay, if the defense is going to play it this way and I do this, then they'll more than likely react in what way? And then I have to have this set. And that's a lot of the things that we talk about when we're talking about conversations, or, hey, if we start this particular group, huddle, Bible study, what could the outcomes be? And in our last huddle session, Brian just said, hey, I think most of you aren't here yet, but before you get too far down a Discovery Bible Study way or to a micro church, have in mind where you're kind of heading, because before you know it, you might get there and you're like, oh no, we haven't thought ahead. And I think that's something that as a coach, you have to constantly, and this is why it's exhausting too, right? Like, because you have to constantly be thinking, okay, what's this next step? Like, if this happens, then this can happen. And then I would need to do this. And now instead of, well, if that defensive coordinator does this, my questions have switched from that to, well, if the Holy Spirit shows up in this, then what way should I go, God? It's just changed who I wouldn't say now I'm coaching against anybody per se, but I'm coaching with someone in the Holy Spirit. And when he moves this way, what does that mean I have to do? How should I move then as I dance with him, so to speak? Or if you want to take it to like, that's me getting into another level. That's not even keeping true to the football terms, right? But like, it's like, you always like, you look at the way like Travis Kelce plays, right? That guy plays the game where he's kind of like, it gets him in trouble too sometimes. Like he'll be in situations where he's like, I'm going to lateral to this guy. I'm going to be in position for this guy to lateral back to me. And like, he gets himself in trouble at times, but it's super cool to think about. He's trying to see the field in a bigger way than just being dialed into, I catch ball, I run, I go,
Yeah. That's good, man.
And we can talk about Patrick Mahomes too, but we won't go into the football nerdum.
You got one now?
Well, I mean, now that we're actually talking football, half my analogies are always going to football, but no, I mean, if you got one, I can circle back to it.
Yeah, it just popped into my mind while you were talking about, as the offensive coordinator, I have to think about this and think about what that defensive coordinator is. And in light of kind of the bigger conversation we've been in around coaching, it just made me think about how coaches get together sometimes. And like, how you have to huddle up with other coaches, and like, we have coaches across our network, and they have intentional gatherings where they're getting together and they're going like, what are you doing? How are you doing? How are you doing what you're doing? So that they can learn from each other. I'm just like, at this point, we have gone into the sports world. So,
right, so
for those that don't enjoy it, sorry.
Well, I mean,
we do.
We got a lot of, I mean, it's a Kansas City podcast, man. So even people who don't love the Chiefs.
I made sure to try to be contextual at least, right?
I appreciate that.
Do you get what I'm saying with the question though? Like, how coaches have conversations, like, how does that translate, do you think?
With other coaches?
Yeah. I'm make the spiritual analogy to the football now.
Man, during the pandemic, one of the things that I started to do was I opened it up for Czech coaches and European coaches, but I just brought in all these different football coaches from all over the globe. Some former NFL guys, some great high school coaches, and like, if you're using this analogy, like, getting together with another coach is like, it allows you to start to hear a story. In many ways, it's just like, or in this case, it's game planning or a play or whatnot. But in our case of what we're talking about now, it allows you to hear what is potentially working and saying, hey, this is working for our context. This play is working for our context, and that means that then we could do this and build this off of it. So if you take that to our conversation, it's really like, I think it's even more so. No, yeah, for sure. It's more so required and needed, I think, for the type of coaching we're talking about as far as discipleship making it, because I think you could just be bogged down so much with, we're trying this and it's not working. We're trying this and it's not working. And you start to get tunnel vision and you start to just stare at your own navel, where I think when you start to have these other conversations with other coaches, it just expands it. To take it back to the football illustration, it gets you from just focusing on one receiver to focusing on the whole pattern, the whole concept opens up. Yeah. And that's where you want to get as a coach. That's where you want to get as a competitor. You want to see the bigger picture. You don't want to just be dialed in to one thing, because if that one thing is taken away, what are you going to do? You just nothing.
That's good.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe my closing kind of thought / question. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on that. Is let's roll with the Travis Kelce, Andy Reid thing. A lot of what you hear around Kansas City and the stories of that offense is Andy lets them be creative. He unleashes them a little bit. They have a ton of time even within practice to, plan new things. And, the Chiefs are kind of notorious for doing a bunch of like weird, crazy goal line plays and calls and whatnot. But there is a beauty. I love the football analogies. This is pumping me up. There's a beauty in unleashing the freedom and creativity of a player to like really run after something different, something new. I think that's getting to the heart of a lot of the coaching that we live into and want to see people live into here is like there is an unleashing of the person, of the regular person, to flourish. And the way to do that is not to bog down with a ton of always instruction in the traditional way, but in the end to release the player to play, like not to sit on the sidelines. Like we're getting people in the game. And so coaching in that sense, coaching adults is different than coaching kids, sometimes in the instruction level. And a lot of the things that I think we're talking about around just adult learning theories and methods and coaching adults and all that stuff is like, we want them to thrive as a player. And a lot of that is like, we fan the flame. We ask the questions. We're come alongsiders more than just, instruction, giving instruction. So I think you're touching on so many of that, and just your own story and the way that you've come about things. So yeah, man, that's just a final thought. I don't know if you had a response to that.
Well,
yeah, you get final word here, Zachary.
Yeah.
Final word. Oh, wow. That's a little bit of pressure. Yesterday I took 2 nights with my youngest son and went up to the Czech Mountains, and I was driving back yesterday, and my team leader and I were talking, and one of the themes that was there was contextualizing what I've been learning from the KC underground to the Czech Republic. And so this is a shout out to Steve, my team leader, but him and I were just talking, and it's really what you just said right there, because me in this culture, even though I'm working on my Czech citizenship, you guys could pray for me. The 14th, I have 2 tests for my Czech citizenship. And Lord willing, I have my Czech passport at some point. I could be a dual citizen now. That will help my street cred, but I'll still always be that weird American that has a weird accent but speaks Czech and whatnot. So him and I were just saying, like, what needs to happen is I need to get to the point where I have these relationships with guys and girls, my wife and I, where we're going to let them run with it and allow them to do what you just said. And then if you think about Jesus, when he sent out the 72 and then they came back and were like, hey, even the demons are listening, right? And then those moments where they're coming back, then all of a sudden it starts teaching me, okay, they're a Czech speaking with a Czech. They're not some pseudo wannabe Czech like me speaking with a Czech. Yeah. So what worked for them? What conversation piece? What strategy? I don't like to use strategy, but what piece sort of struck a chord with that person, and what can we learn about the larger culture in that as we interact with it with the gospel? And when he said that to me, as I was like, but what does it mean? How do I do this? Like, I'm trying to, and it was going back to my very linear, like, tell me how to do it and I will do it, because that's part of being a football player, right? Like, my dad was a football coach. I've been around him all my life. Part of it's like, do this and it will get you that outcome. But the next level as a coach, as a player, is where, just as you said, Cory, is where you could start to know what's going on so well that will free you up to just let those creative, like, hey, I was just talking to this person and all of a sudden I asked this question and I didn't think it would go anywhere. And next thing you know, I was invited to the local pub and I got, 10 angry, grumpy Czech men complaining about everything. And they're looking at me and wanting to know what's going on. And I'm just, okay, that hasn't happened to me in a few years. When I was a single, these things happen all the time. Now, yeah, it doesn't happen as much, but just that's an example, like letting the folks that we're working with, that we're walking with, saying, hey, just try to do this, breaking it down into small pieces and letting them know why, the whys, and then just say, hey, go give it a try and let's just talk about it. And giving them those tools, and all of a sudden you start hearing things that you never would have thought. And I've even seen it with my wife. She is Czech, so like she is a Czech talking to Czech. She's not like a wannabe like me, and like she's taken some of this stuff we've talked about and tried it. And all of a sudden I'll look at her, I'm like, I could have never done that because I'm an American, and I always as an American, but she could have taken that step because it's like
she's the insider.
She's the insider. And as hard as I try to be an insider and create things for me to be an insider, which we should be doing as missionaries anywhere, I'll never be an insider. So completely.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I mean, final thought on this is there's two snacks I've been thinking about is like these gospels. I mean, puppy chow, you guys know what I'm talking about? Like the Crispers with like the sugar and peanut butter chocolate. That's good stuff. And then underrated Cheetos Puffs. Had a bunch of those.
Okay, hey Cory, I need to see if you know this. A couple weeks ago, my dad sent me a package, which is his love language. Shout out to Doug Harrod. And he sent half of that box was red vines. Cory, do you know what red vines are?
I do know red vines.
I've never heard of them.
Okay, Brian has never heard of red vines. I was like,
I've heard of Twizzlers.
Well, yeah. And Twizzlers, I mean, I think are way better. But red vines,
Cory, come on, Cory.
Like red vines, love red vines, and I see that, Zachary. That's your red vine guy. That's cool.
They're soft. They're soft. It's not like you're like chewing on plastic.
I have to tell a quick story now. My neighbor is I don't know, whatever. His job, he makes sure things are safe. That's the best way to explain it. So he was at the Cheez-Its factory yesterday, and he texted me and he goes, the Cheez-Its factory is down. So he had to show up to do some stuff. I don't remember what it was, but he goes, I got there and I looked at him and I said, hey, I just want you to know my kids are a big fan of your work. And he goes, they just stared at me. I'm dying laughing. He goes, they did not get this joke. Anyway, I wanted to.
Hey, Cory, he just blew up what you were trying to do with that ending. So
I haven't had lunch yet, and it's like 1:00 here. That makes
hey, Zachary, thanks for hanging with us. This is good stuff, man.
Thank you guys.
And this is going
what you're doing.
So for all of you listening and watching or whatever you do, let's pray for Zachary. And man, I just blanked on that. Citizenship
you can do it.
Test. Thank you, Cory. Thank you for being a good coach in that moment.
You just need a snack, like some chips and salsa.
And if you've never done the missionary pathway, do it. underground.org/train. Find the next one and jump in.
Booyah.
All right.
Thanks, Zachary. Good
Thanks,
stuff,
guys.
See ya. Don't move.